I just want to quickly run you through a little bit about Regional Development Australia for those who don't know us. And then I'm going to throw to Katrina Houghton from ID. And she's going to take us through some COVID data that says where we're sitting against Australia and Queensland and our local council here. And then she's actually going to navigate us through the ID profile tool. So 2 tabs, the community tab and the economic tab. So I'm going to keep mine fairly short and sweet so we can get to Kat. But for those of you who don't know, Regional Development Australia is partly funded by the Department of Infrastructure, but we are an independent organisation. So there are 52 RDAs across all of Australia. They've pretty much mapped out the whole of Australia. And each RDA is run by an independent board. So under our charter, we have got this region here that you see in front of you, which is 10 councils. So it's actually 23% of Queensland when you look at the land space. So it's quite a bit of kilometres that we do. And 10 councils, 7 state members and 2 federal members across that. And part of our charter is that we're the independent body that can help coordinate and facilitate between the 3 levels of government, business and industry and community. So a lot of our role is about connecting and collaborating and introducing people to each other and streamlining processes and projects for them. So under our RDA charter, there's 3 overarching priorities. One is improving access to funding. So as you can imagine, that's a lot of what today is about. You are going to learn how you can use data to have a better quality grant application. The other thing that we do to help you access funding is on the RDA Darling Downs Southwest site, there's a funding tab that summarises every month all of the grants that we can find that our region would be able to apply for. So they can be state, federal, local, business, community grant, a whole heap in there. Okay, so that's the improving access to funding. The second priority is, and these aren't in any order, is to progress projects. So some people say to me, well, isn't that the same as number 1? You know, because if you've got the funding, you can progress a project. But sometimes a project isn't progressing because it's not the right stakeholders playing together, and we'll be the independent body that'll come in and help facilitate that. It could be that there's a barrier in your way and we can help lobby or advocate to get that barrier out of your way. So there's different reasons why a project might not be progressing, but we can help coordinate that. The last one is that we are used to the RDA network by the federal government to give them intel. So to let them know what's really going on the ground, because obviously Australia is a very big place and so is Darling Downs Southwest. So we've never seen the federal government use the RDA network to the level of what they have during COVID. So we were on 3 teleconferences a week with our Minister, Nola Marino. She sits under McCormack. Feeding back to her what was really going on as far as job seeker, job keeper, we now need childcare, we're getting this feedback from businesses, they're having problems with the banks, all that stuff would get fed back to her, and then she passes it on to the relevant department. So sends that information to Treasury, sends that off to Home Affairs, whoever it might be. So the point for you to take away from this is to really use the RDA network and let us know what's really going on, and we will be that conduit back to the federal government for you. So we are now on weekly teleconferences with our minister, so not 3 a week. And then separately to that, Minister Marino will line us up with other ministers who will get on a teleconference with the whole 52 RDA network and update us on that. So a couple we've got lined up is Minister G is talking to us about decentralisation in a couple of weeks. So there's a new appetite for that with COVID, which we're loving, so we want to support that. And also we've got one about digital connectivity coming up with Minister Colton, and we've got one with manufacturing minister coming up. So they're just ad hoc, those ones, but they come up fairly often and fairly regularly. The good thing is if we ever have a particular thing that we want a minister to speak to us about, we can line that up. So one of the key meetings I've got tomorrow is a teleconference with, no, not tomorrow, Friday, with Minister Marino is around giving us a heads up about Building Better Regions Fund. So that's a big one that we want to be involved in. So please keep giving us information that we can feed back to the federal government. On the screen, you'll see our particular RDA has got 4 key portfolios, so 4 areas that we see are key for our region. And so they're on the screen. Usually in this presentation, I tell you about Economy ID and how we partly fund it in collaboration with each council in our region, and how you should all use it and the data that's in it, and it's a publicly available portal, and get on it and all the rest of it. I am not going to waste your time talking about that today because we have the guru, Kat, here to talk to us about that. So my level of knowledge, although it has increased greatly this week, because this is workshop number 5 of 7 that we're delivering in 4 days, it has increased greatly, but certainly the person who knows what they're talking about the most is Kat. So that one that you see on your screen is the link to our funding tab on the RDA website. So you can write it down if you want, but you will get copies of my slides and you will get copies of Kat's slides. So you will get that, but you just Google the RDA Darling Down Southwest and the tab up the top says funding. So it's really not hard to find. And we have all of the grants that are available to you across the region. Separately for that, for those who can see my screen, I just wanted to let you know there is also this document that will get sent to you. A lot of grants and funding are for not-for-profit and community groups and for councils, right? But there are programs and grants available for business. So if you're a business that's on this call, this is your Bible. We will send it to you. And pretty much the top line is the grants and programs available to state, and the bottom line are the grants and programs available to federal government. It is one of those few times that state and federal work together and put this document together. So we quite like it for that reason as well. And then the front and the back has more detail about each of those programs. So you can tap on it and see whether or not you would fit the criteria. There are other business grants that occasionally come up, but those will go on to that tab that I just showed you. So keep an eye on it. Also, if there's any businesses in the room or anyone that knows of somebody who is trying to get staff, next week we have the virtual jobs fair, so that's it there. You will get a link to that flyer as well. And even though it's being facilitated by Employ Toowoomba, because we're the facilitator, the chair of Employ Toowoomba, we are expanding that out to all the Darling Down Southwest. So I need to acknowledge that that is a separate contract to our Department of Infrastructure funding. We got a separate contract through Department of Employment, Small Business and Training, so the state government. They're probably about to change the name of that department, but to facilitate what they're calling the Toowoomba Jobs Committee. With that Jobs Committee, we have got the virtual jobs fair where you can be a business that registers, and you have people who literally get online and tell you why they might want to fill one of your positions that you've got available. So go to employtoowoomba.net.au and you can get some more information about that. But after these workshops, probably tomorrow, you'll get an email from Tim Smith, our admin assistant, giving you our PowerPoints and those 2 documents that I just held up and showed to those who are on the Zoom call. So don't stress, you will get copies of all of that. And the other thing I just want to let you know is for those that are on the Zoom, and we got a lot on Zoom today, just letting you know that you can put your questions in the chat, or you can email them through to admin@rda-ddsw.org.au, and Tim will try and answer them, or we will get Kat to do some further investigation if needed. So I'm going to hand over to Kat, and I will just keep an eye on the chat. So please put any comments and things in the chat, and I'll let Kat take it away from here. Is it? 1 second, guys. We've just got a bit of an issue that it's sharing something different to those attendees in the room on the big screen and something different to you on Zoom. So we're just trying to get that fixed for you, and Kat will get started.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Okay, guys. So today I'm going to be delivering a presentation on the national, state and local impacts of coronavirus on the Balonne Shire Council. And you'll see from the results when we drill down into your particular council area and a lot of the council areas within the Darling Downs Southwest is that you've really been quite immune to what has happened, particularly in an economic sense. What I do want to show you today, though, is the fact that the changes that are happening at the national, state, and even at the regional level are going to be really important for whether or not you guys can take advantage of some of the opportunities that are falling out of this crisis and some of the potential future challenges that we might see in this particular area. So it's really important to know and have an understanding of what's going on elsewhere and how that might affect you guys in the long run as we make those structural changes to our both our national economy and also the global economy. So from ID's perspective, we cover about 350 councils Australia-wide. We mainly work with councils around things like grant applications, what's happening in terms of your economic performance, you know, what is the impact of specific events or things like that on your local economy as well. So we do lots of different things, but we certainly work really closely with councils so they can get an idea of exactly what's happening in their local area. Now, I'm hoping this is going to just click through. Okay, so the first thing we know from this crisis is our impacts vary from region to region, and that's all over Australia. So you may have a local government area directly opposite you or just above you that is performing poorly, and you guys might be performing really well. It comes down to what is your industry mix, how many cases have you had in your community, transmitted cases, whether or not your social distancing measures ended after 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 6 months. your exposure to international tourism has been extremely important, but also international migration, those population drivers. The Australian economy, the growth that we've seen over the last 10 years and the fact that we have been able to, ward off a global financial crisis and things like that has really been driven by the fact that we've had such a high level of international migration. So it's really important that we understand what that means for our local economy. And we know that the virus is not yet under control. It is still uncontained, and we see about 60,000 cases every day around the world. We know we're going into lockdown at the moment in Europe, and that has lots of different implications for Australia, particularly with our importing, our exporting, and our population growth. We can see Victoria is coming towards the end of the second wave, and that will present some real opportunities for the Queensland economy. But what we really want to look at is when the world catches a cold, what is that economic fallout? What does that look like? And we know that the impacts of this crisis are much worse than that which occurred with the global financial crisis. So we can see that our impact on GDP growth was actually more than double what occurred with the GFC. And that's because it's also hindered on emerging markets and developing economies just as much as it did on our more advanced economies. Our major trading partners are expected to contract by around 3%. We've already seen a bit of a return, particularly in China, around steel production and things like that. But certainly our trading partners and our growth with our trading partners has slowed down. And the record is over in Australia. Our quarterly growth in Australian GDP is down by over 8%. And you can see there, the last time we had some major difficulties was really around the 1970s, 1980s. In the 1970s, we had the oil price shocks in Australia, but certainly we are in a much more significantly difficult situation than we were in back then. People receiving job assistance payments has risen to 11%, and it has not fallen. Now, job assistance payments are job seeker payments. This is not job keeper, okay? Hospitality sector has been hit the hardest. Art and rec, ag, forestry and fishing initially was hit very hard, but we also had the legacy of the bushfires in January. But certainly accommodation and food services were hit very, very hard. So the Sunshine State, we can see the impacts vary from state to state as well. And you'll notice that New South Wales and Victoria, who had higher numbers of cases within their community, have been hit much harder. And as really the economic powerhouses of Australia, they have been what has been driving the downturn in the Australian economy. When you look at Queensland and we look at our payroll job impacts, and we see 100 there, that's really our pre-COVID level. So what we want to see is our payroll jobs, so the amount of jobs that we have on the books, start to return to that level. And we can see there Queensland and the recovery in Queensland is well and truly underway at a much higher pace than we can see in the other states. But unemployment is higher than the national average and more people have left the labour force. Now, unemployment has been higher in Queensland for a number of years, and our participation rate is always tends to be a little bit less. And you'll know during a recession, your participation rate normally falls again as people tend to leave the labour market and not return. So we've had some jobs growth recovery to July, but we still have an extra 150,000 people on job assistance. So that's unemployment benefits or youth allowance. Our coastal tourism hotspots with international market reliance and inner Brizzy were hit the hardest. So those areas, regardless of where we are, our major capital that drives a lot of our state economy was hit extremely hard during this period due to those social distancing measures. You can see at the top there, our greatest fall in payroll jobs, Gold Coast, Cairns, Sunny Coast, Brisbane inner city. The top three heavily reliant on visitors to their destinations to create economic growth. Our regions ranked in terms of closest return to payroll jobs. So these are the regions that have recovered the quickest we're looking at Toowoomba, Central Queensland, Moreton Bay South, Brizzy East, Mackay, Isaac, Whitsunday. Agriculture has been really driving some of that return, and we also see in some of those areas, Mackay, Isaac, Whitsunday, by the mining sector. Domestic visitation to regional areas has increased substantially. Those local government areas that have been able to tap into the domestic market quickly and really effectively have done extremely well during this crisis, and that is key. If you can establish a good relationship with your domestic tourists and you can create marketing that appeals to that audience that sits in those major capitals and in those heavily populated areas, you will do well out of this crisis. International travel, is going to be non-existent for a long period of time, and the quicker we can shift to our domestic tourism markets, the better off our tourism industry will be. So Queensland is more vulnerable than other states to international flight restrictions, but less vulnerable in terms of international students. So we know that this reduction in population from overseas and international migration not only affects our long-term population growth, but also our education providers. And that's one thing that Queensland in some ways is a little bit immune to around. We don't have as many international students. However, those international flight restrictions have had a heavy impact on regions like the Gold Coast, Brisbane and Cairns. So Queensland will also experience much slower population growth. However, once the national restrictions ease, we might start to experience more domestic in-migration. So you can see there, Queensland is much more reliant on net interstate migration than Victoria and New South Wales. We also, in terms of our net overseas migration, have a lot, we are a lot less vulnerable in that particular area. And what we saw in the 1990s when Victoria was hit hard in that economic recession, we tended to find that in Queensland, we had a significant influx of Victorians into our state. So it's really thinking about what that means moving forward, what it means for people now using technology to perform their job roles, and how regions might be able to attract people to their locations. We know in some areas, some council areas, it's very difficult to buy parcels of land at the moment because they're selling so quickly. We have regional areas in Queensland that have never seen their real estate market shift the way that it has at this point in time, and people are getting asking price. So it's a really interesting state of affairs that we're going into, that we're moving into, but it's certainly probably the first time in my career that I have seen such an amazing opportunity for regional Queensland. So there's going to be a bumpy road to recovery, and we've already passed through some of these phases, hopefully. The social distancing impacts, number one, that had a significant impact on our accommodation sectors, retail trade, things like that. Then we have this next stage, which is our falling investment and spending. And this really affects our metro areas. As we start to see people invest less in their business, people start to increase their household savings rate and that sort of thing. Then we also have this third area where the JobKeeper program ramps down, and we're looking at sort of March-ish next year. And then we have our long run structural changes that we'll see occur in our economy as well. So households and businesses have cut spending. We're seeing that come through the economy at the moment. Our savings, household savings are up, and also our business spending on research and development is back to our 2006 levels. So many jobs are vulnerable when JobKeeper is removed, and this will weigh on our household spending as well as our confidence. Now, there will be some regions, and we were in Peru last night, there are no people on JobKeeper assistance. There are lots of regions in Queensland at the moment where we have very few people on JobKeeper. So it's really interesting. I think people are afraid of this period in March when we may see a shift, but you know, some areas this shift will not come because there are no people accessing that JobKeeper payment, or alternatively very few. So we can see here those areas that do have a high proportion of people with JobKeeper: Douglas, Whitsunday, Noosa. So straight away, there are tourist localities that are heavily dependent on visitors to their region. So the Queensland economy is expected to outperform the nation. We will recover much quicker than the rest of Australia. We're already starting to see that. Now let's look at those regional impacts. So initially, the largest job impacts were in regional areas. However, this is starting to change. And part of that legacy was because of those bushfires and drought. But as we're moving into the next phase and we're looking at that household spending and we're looking at that reduction in R&D spending, it's starting to hit those more metro areas. And you can see here, this is our job changes by region. And you can see the deep dark red areas where there's been a significant change in people accessing job seeker, in our border localities, particularly between New South Wales and Victoria, as well as our tourist destinations up in North Queensland. This is our job seeker changes broken down by local government area in Queensland only, and we can see Douglas Shire up there in the north. We've got Noosa has had a significant change, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast right down there on the border. We've even got Longreach and Winton out there in the centre. So we can see where those areas are that have been heavily hit by this crisis in terms of jobs. Agriculture regions have been less exposed. There are challenges that remained. We've got that legacy of the drought and the bushfires. And even though we see global economics is weak, we're starting to see a real return in the marketplace as restaurants start to come back online and we're buying local produce and that sort of thing. So here's a framework to understand our regional impacts. I'm not going to drill right down into this. What I am going to say is that the social distancing impacts, for very good reason, impacted our international tourism destinations and any city centre or activity centre, regardless of how big your town is. So even though you have may have a small main street, those areas were affected because people weren't allowed to go into those areas to buy their coffees, their breakfast, whatever it might be, access the local dentist, the doctor, whatever that might be. Then we've got our falling investment and spending, and this is where we really hit our population-reliant regions, also our ag regions, metropolitan areas, as people start to reduce their spending in those areas. And then there's the long-run damage and opportunities. So it's really uncertain what's going to happen. One, we're not sure when we're going to get that vaccine, and the vaccine is really the panacea of what's going to happen. But certainly there are some opportunities around thinking about that local amenity and how we can attract people to come and live in our regions, to work and take advantage of those lifestyle factors that some of our great regions have. So the Belong recovery, how is the Belong Shire recovery coming along? And this is what our economy looked like prior to the COVID health crisis. And I'll show you where you can get this information on the tool. And you can see that since 2017, we've had an economy in decline since that period. But the Belong industry is much less vulnerable to COVID-19. It's probably the first time I've come out to regional areas and said, actually, you might be in a better position than some of your neighbours. And we can see here that's because your main industries in terms of employment are ag, healthcare and social assistance, a little bit of retail, education and training. So Belong is outperforming the rest of Queensland. Okay, so we can see 35.9% GRP change since September last year. So September is pre-COVID. We have compared your September quarter of this year, and you guys are performing better this year than you were September last year. So it's really, really interesting to see. Most places I'm going to, I'm talking about how you've had a downturn over that period. We're actually talking here about how we've had some success. We can also see our local job change is 6.1%. So we've actually increased our number of local jobs from September last year to September this year. Our employed resident change has also increased by 6.8%. So you can see what that impact is. Absolutely. So here we can see this chart's almost flipped on its head because most places are negative. And we can see compared to regional Queensland, Australia, how well you guys are performing in both jobs and GRP. And these are the industries that are finding strength. So this is what's driving that growth: ag, forestry and fishing, healthcare and social assistance, right down to administrative and support services. So we can see we've had some growth across a variety of different industries, but mainly it's that agricultural sector that's driving our growth in this region. Zero Belong residents' jobs are compensated by JobKeeper payments. So we don't have anyone on JobKeeper payments here at the moment, or this is what's coming through the data through Treasury. We have had an increased number of job seeker recipients, and I can actually drill down into what these numbers look like. And we can see in Belong from March through to September, this was our increase in our number of job seeker recipients, okay? We've had some recovery since July across the board in RDA, Darling Downs and South West, but in Belong, we've actually had a teeny increase in that period, July through to September, around people accessing JobKeeper. And as I say, job seeker, I should say, I want to be really clear about that. This is job seeker, this is unemployment benefits. So it's people accessing those payments. So move to recovery, our opportunities. Tourism plans, making sure we're really targeting that domestic tourist. That is going to be huge for you guys. That is a really, really important part of your regional recovery, and also just your initiatives to push population growth and create strength in those areas. This will be a time when people will travel to this locality from destinations like Brisbane, and just outside of Brisbane, those heavily populated areas, Sydney, Melbourne, to be able to come and have a look at your area. So it's a really important time to make sure we get that local amenity right. Activity centre strategies dealing with potential for higher vacancies, but also just ensuring that our businesses are somewhat prepared for the fact that we may be on display at this time. Infrastructure projects are going to be highly competitive. Lots of opportunities, I should say. Remote working. Remote working is something now that has become very normal, and people are getting used to it, and people that previously would never have done this sort of thing have been forced to. So it's opened up a whole range of opportunities around remote working. Agriculture, food, high quality local produce, growing our local manufacturing, improving those supply chain links is really important. We know that this has had an impact not just on our exports, but also imports to get stuff in to create that advanced manufacturing in this country. Transport and logistics, skills development, mental health programs, particularly supporting youth and females who were affected much more heavily because of the nature of the industries by this crisis. So are there any questions from the, I'm going to go into the chat, from the, are you looking at the chat?
Yeah, I've just got some for
cool.
Those. No questions, specifically, just some that I'm going to send other presentations to.
Mm-hmm. Any questions, guys? Is that what you thought?
No.
Not at all? Yeah. Yeah, I've been to a couple of shires out here, and you know, it is quite surprising, and I think it's quite positive. And it certainly is bucking some of the trends in other areas, but it really shows how reliant metro areas are on a certain level of household spending, you know, and a certain level of visitors and tourists. Yeah. So I'm just going to stop share, guys, so I can get onto the portal now. Where's my portal? Here. Does that come up? Yep, perfect. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the community profile and the economic profile on the RDA Darling Downs and South West site. Okay, and this is the tool that you guys use to find evidence to support your grant applications, to find evidence to support maybe a bank application that you might be submitting, Also, just to find information on your community, to be able to identify areas of investment, to be able to identify changes within your community that might be happening, to allow your council to make some really great decisions on where to invest or what projects to deliver. So the first place I'm going to go to is the community profile, and I'm going to go straight down to the bottom, guys. And the reason I'm going down to the bottom is because I want to show you this menu. So today I'm not going to run through all of those topics because we'll be here all day. I'm going to pick out maybe 3 or 4 just to show you the formatting and the way it's laid out, so that you guys can come through and start to get an idea for your community, what the figures might mean. So that's my menu down the bottom, and we've got things like household summary, occupations, qualifications, age groups, ancestry, birthplace. There's a whole raft of information that you guys can use to identify different things in your community. So the first thing I'm going to go to is population highlights. And the reason I normally go to this page is because if I'm new to an area and I'm visiting an area, sometimes I have to go to South Australia, and I'll come on here and I'll want to have a look at the area that I'm visiting. Now, when I come on here, I can click on any of the local government areas that sit underneath the RDA and Darling Downs Southwest region. I can also click on an overlay of the Southwest region. And what this is going to do is collect me all the data that comes within that local government area. So here I'm on Ballon because that's where we are. And we can see here population 4,360, grown by 27 from the previous year. It shows me my population over time and how it's changed. It talks to me about my median age, and it compares that median age to the rest of RDA, DDSW, regional Queensland and Queensland. Talks to me about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, couples with children, older couples without children, lone person households, a whole raft of information on this page that straight away gives me an idea of what this community looks like. And I can come down the bottom here, right down to looking at our CFA index, which talks to me about how disadvantaged the community is.
For any of those on
the Zoom, let me know if you can't actually see Kat's screen.
Am I on now?
Yeah, sorry guys, I think you might have missed some of that because it wasn't shared.
Sorry guys.
I was going through and jotting down all your emails for the different councils that you represent, and I missed that the screen wasn't sharing. Thank you, Sherilyn, for letting me know. We're good.
So guys, that's the Ballon Shire there. So I was just talking to the team and was saying, here you can come to a drop down and you can look at those population highlights for all of the different regions that come down on this drop down. And then when you come down to the bottom, you can see all of these different, what we call tiles of information on your community compared to RDA, DDSW, regional Queensland and Queensland. Before I just mentioned the menu. This is the menu of items that you can click on to look at the various elements within this community profile, which is my red profile. So that's my population highlights. The other thing, guys, is you can export that into PDF. If you export that into PDF, you can print it out and you can have it sitting there at your desk. The next thing we're going to look at, we talk about population and our population estimates. It breaks it down into Indigenous, women, men, population over 15 years, that sort of thing. The next one I'm going to show you, though, that I think is really important is our 5-year age groups. And when we come down here, we've got our area once again, and you can click on any of these areas in the drop-down. Then you can also change your benchmark area. It's really important if you're trying to tell a story to the state government or the federal government that you change your drop-down to Queensland or Australia. Okay, so you guys, if you're going for a grant application with the state government, you'll want to compare Ballon to the Queensland state. Okay, so when we come down here, you always, guys, get these data tables. It talks to me about all the numbers that come in these categories. And you can actually export that table into Excel or Word. So if you want to accompany that to your application and say, well, actually, you know, we've had population decline in these areas, you're able to put that straight into a Word or an Excel. I live in the charts, and the reason I live in the charts is because I can straight away look at this and say, okay, I can see what's happening. We've got a high percentage of young people in our community. So that's where we have what we call sort of our dominant age structure. Our dominant age structure is sort of over 40, and we fall away here in our working population, which is really important to keep those guys going. And also they bring along these little people as well. So we can see where our dominant age structure is, but this is our change in our age structure. So it's important to know what we have a lot of, but it's also important to know where we're seeing that change over time. And we can see that shift here to an ageing population. And that, guys, has implications for council planning. It has implications for the types and styles of dwellings that you guys provide. It also has implications for your healthcare and social assistance, residential aged care, all of that sort of thing. This is also a problem when we start to see our working families leaving the community as well. When you get down the bottom, you get this dominant and emerging group analysis. You guys can use that information in your grant applications or in your information to the mayor, CEO, or your boss to be able to say this is what's happening. You can use that as if it's your own. So that's my age groups. You can also export this entire page into Word or PDF. So if you need it to accompany an application, you can put it straight in that entire page. So that's our how old are we? Who are we? I'm going to go straight down to qualifications, because we often talk about skills in our community and how important it is that our community is skilled. And we can once again see here our area is Balonne Shire. Our benchmark area is Queensland, and we're comparing census to census. Let's come down here straight into my charts, and we can see we have a much higher percentage of people in this shire that are not qualified, lower percentage of vocational, advanced diploma and bachelor or higher degrees. But when we see our change over time, we can see that people are becoming more skilled, which is great. And we can see no qualifications in the community during that period. So there has been a shift. What we would want to say if we're going for an application, once again, dominant and emerging groups, what we would want to show in an application is this slide, to say we would like to improve our skills in our community, because as you can see, compared to Queensland as a whole, we are less educated or we are less qualified to do things. Okay, so that's our qualifications. You can also look at your highest level of schooling, education, institution attending. I'm not going to look at what do we do, simply because we're going to go on to the economic profile, and that's going to show us a lot of that information. But I am going to look at how do we live, and I'm going to go to our household summary. And this gives me an idea of what our household structures look like. Are we couples with children? Are we one-parent families? Are we group households? What do our households look like? And we can see here we're very dominant in couples with children and couples without children. And we've got this sort of bit of activity out here in lone persons, but we can see they're dominant in couples with children and couples without children. But where are we seeing our change? This is where we're seeing people leave the region. Now that's where we need to do some, I guess, use some of that local knowledge to be able to say, is that jobs related? Is that related to the types of schools that are on offer in this particular locality? Is it access to daycare? What are the fundamental reasons why we have so many couples with children leaving the region? If it's opportunity based, what can we do as a community, as a local council, to try and ebb the flow away from moving out of the region there? And we've had this little increase here in terms of lone person households, which is something we're seeing across regional Queensland and also in the metro areas. Here's our dominant and emerging groups analysis once again, guys. So that's our household type. I'm going to go to household size, because we can have a household type of, families. We can have a household type of families, but our household size is quite small. So we can see here household size, mainly two-person households and one-person households. So let's move down and see where we've changed. We've changed here, guys, now 1 and 2 person households. So we've had a fall away in all of these 3 person plus households. So that's all of our families moving outside of the region. So that's how do we live. The next place I'm going to take you is to our job seeker information, because this is updated monthly. So most of the information that you guys will find on the community profile is related to the census. And the census is really, really important for communities like Belong. Okay, I was in Peru last night, and Trudy and I were talking to the mayor and CEO there about how important it is that we get people filling in that census, because it is your population number, regardless of whether you think it is right or wrong. This population count that comes out of the census will be used to look at funding for your region, whether it be for roads, you know, other bits of infrastructure, that sort of thing. So it's really important that we're putting our best foot forward. So this is our job seeker information. As I mentioned before, it actually tells us our number of people that are on job seeker. Okay, so we can see here in September 2020, we've got 297 people in Belong on job seeker or youth allowance. Okay, so that's grown by 105 since March 2020. Okay, so it's keeping an eye on that, because soon we're going to get those October 2020 figures. And that's going to be really important for you guys when you're putting forward your applications for grants. So when the next round of BBRF comes out, this may be part of the story to say, yeah, we may not have people on JobKeeper, but we have an increased number of people on job seeker. And that's obviously a concern. You know, that's something that you want to be able to make sure that we start to see a return back to where we previously were. So here's our March 2020 to September numbers. I just lifted this, so I just copied this straight out of here and put it into a presentation. Okay, so you can just lift that information straight out and put it into a presentation to show people. But this is a really important one for particularly your mayors and CEOs as well, just to be across what is happening in those changes to job seeker. The last thing I'm going to show you on this page, sorry, I'm just heading down, is down here we've got this reports area. Okay, and if I click on my downloads, I come to reports, and I can actually print out a report on the Belong Shire or RDA DDSW or Peru or Quilpie or Southwest Reds region, and I can click on all of these variables, and I can put my email in down the bottom, and I'm able to send that to myself, and I will get all of the information and all of the data that I need from this site will come to me in my email. Okay, so it's a way of, and then you can print it and go through it. One thing I would suggest is probably send it to yourself in Word and take out all the bits that you don't need, and then print it out, and you've got all of that information there with you. Now, the next thing I'm going to go to is the economic profile. Now, the economic profile draws its data from different locations. There's a number of them. So it looks at data like ATO data, it looks at household expenditure survey, it looks at Dun & Bradstreet data, it looks at data from Centrelink, all sorts of different places it draws this data. Now we've got data from Treasury, and it draws this data in, and every year we update the economic profile of all of our LGAs in Australia. So we have about over 350, and we update all of the LGAs and have a look at how their economy has performed over the previous year. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this profile in a roundabout way, because I want to show you the areas that I think are the most important for you guys to have an understanding of. Once again, down the bottom, there is a menu of items. Now there's over 1,200 pieces of data in this tool. So it's important to really stay focused on what you need and think about the question that you're trying to answer. And sometimes you might not be able to answer it, and that's the time to email Trudy or Tim at RDA and say, hey, look, I'm actually trying to find out what the unemployment rate is for the Indigenous population that that was in manufacturing or whatever it might be. Okay, so you can drill down and then we can go looking for that data for you. So the economic indicators, the first thing I go to is gross product. And what I'm going to do, you'll notice I'm on the RDA Darling Downs and Southwest region. Just go straight to my drop down, click Balonne Shire, and it'll give me the data for Balonne. Okay, so I can see this is the chart that I copied and pasted straight into my PowerPoint presentation that I just had on before. Here's my cumulative change. So depending on what story you want to tell might depend on what graphic you choose here. So we can see our cumulative change compared to Queensland. So this is a good chart to be able to look at to say, well, actually, we're moving away from Queensland. Queensland seems to be growing and we seem to be moving in the opposite direction. We've also got our fall away in terms of our GRP here. We can see we've started to, our annual change wasn't as bad as the year previous. And then we've got our actual figures down here below. And you can have a look at those figures and go, what happened in 2009? Was that related to agriculture? What happened in 2012? That sort of thing. So that's our gross product. The next one I like to look at is local employment. So we have our story around growth, but we also there's also a separate story that comes around local jobs. And here we can see, even though we had a fall in our growth in terms of our GRP, we actually had a slight increase in the number of jobs on offer in the Balonne Shire. So when we come down here, you can see your annual change in jobs was actually 1.7% compared to Queensland actually had a fall in jobs growth. And we can see here 2.14% change in growth, 2,329 to 2,378. They're the sorts of things that you guys can quote. Okay, so if you have a media release, you want to talk about the fall in GRP, you might want to talk about the jobs growth that's happened in your community. Okay, so, you know, that's just another way of being able to look at your data. The next one I look at is unemployment. And I'm not necessarily a massive fan of unemployment, but I know that funding bodies sometimes will look to this particular rate because it's a rate that is used across all areas. And we can see here in the Balonne Shire, 2.6% unemployment rate. So it's pretty much zero because some of that will be structural change. When we come down here, we actually get the data. Okay, so you actually get numbers 66, 74, 109. And when we move down here, we actually get a full chart right back to 2010. Okay. And once again, guys, you can export this entire page into PDF. You can export all your pages, all your charts and tables. You can't break this tool. Okay.
Stop saying that. Somebody's going to challenge you.
Someone will break it. Yeah, and the boys will ring me from Melbourne and go, what did you tell the people in wherever? And I'll go, I don't know. Here's our building approvals. Now, building approvals are really important to monitor. Okay, building approvals is data we actually get from the council. Okay, and it's important to monitor because if we see this, which is we're at August, okay, if we see zero in our building approvals in January, we need to start thinking about what we're going to do because that will have implications for our construction sector and it will have implications for our growth for the year. So we can see here at the moment, there are no building approvals year to date. Okay, so that's something, you know, that certainly we need to keep an eye on. Okay, the next thing I go to, okay, so I've gone economic indicators and that's given me all my headline data. The next thing I want to look at is my economic value. And I go to economic value and I come down and I click on the second one there, which is value added. And the reason I want to look at my value added of all my industries is because I want to be able to find out what is the most productive industry in the region, and how productive are they actually, and have they improved their productivity over the previous year or not. And the first thing I do is I come in, I check my current area, I check my benchmark, and then I come into here with this comparison year and I change it to the previous year. And the reason I change it to the previous year is because in November of this year, and then the release is in February, so the new data will be coming now, it'll be released in February. In February next year, you guys are going to want to change that to 18-19 so you can compare it to 19-20. Okay, so you want to see what the effect has been on each of your industries in terms of their profitability over the previous year. Okay, so what we can see here is between 17-18 and 18-19, we had a fall in terms of value add. So value add is what I sort of like to call the profitability of about 11 million. And we can see where within agriculture that hit has been taken. We can also see we had a downturn in mining, manufacturing, we were up a little bit. And you can go down here and investigate all of these different areas, and you can click on here and you can straight away get those subsectors. Okay, so IG used to just have the headline figure, but now we break it down into subsectors. And the reason for that is because manufacturing, for example, has lots of subsectors. So if we see a decline in manufacturing, we may actually see an increase in food product manufacturing, but a decline in basic metal and chemical product manufacturing. It's important to know the difference because they're two very different industries that work very differently, different skills, all of that sort of thing. So that's my data table. Then I come down and I get the same thing. I get those charts and I can see here in terms of my value added by industry, ag, forestry and fishing, we are extremely dominant. It's almost 50% of our profitability in our economy. When we move down here, we can see the change that has happened between 17, 18, 18, 19. And next year, in that February period, we will be able to see what has happened over that previous year as well. Let's have a look down here. Once again, guys, dominant and emerging groups. So the whole site is set up so that it's really convenient and really easy for you guys to follow. If you ever get lost, that's when you contact Trudy and she'll contact me and say, Kat, we can't find this. Or can you guys do a half-hour, Kat, could you do a half-hour Zoom session with Balonne Shire Council? They just want to figure out how to find these things. Okay, so never be shy to ask the question. The next thing I'm going to go to is my local employment. Okay, and I'm looking at employment by industry because I want to see who's working and what's happened in some of our businesses, because we saw that even though there was a decline in our GRP, there was actually an increase in the amount of people employed. And we can see between 17, 18 and 18, 19, we actually increased the amount of people employed in ag, forestry and fishing. Okay, we also increased our employment in manufacturing, healthcare and social assistance. We had 16 in medical and other healthcare services. So we can go right through, guys, and have a look at each of them. Here we can see our major employer is ag. We've also got healthcare and social assistance. Retail trade is up there, education and training. Then we can have a look at where we gained those employment numbers. Ag, manufacturing, electric, gas, construction, healthcare, arts and rec and other services. Once again, guys, you get your dominant and emerging groups down the bottom. So that's our employment. The next one I'm going to go to is my industry focus. And now this is for those of you that might work on a specific industry, or you want to showcase to the government how much investment is not coming into a particular industry, or how an industry is failing in the community, or whatever it might be. So we can come down here and we do our industry sector analysis of all industries. That talks to me about how many people are employed, how many people are FTEs in our community, what's our output, what's our value add of all industries in Balonne. What I might want to look at though is I might say, well, actually, I want to have a look at ag. I want to break that down and figure out how much we're exporting, how much of that is domestic, how much of that is international. So straight away, I can see we're not as reliant on international exports as we are on domestic. Excellent, because when COVID hit, those communities that were heavily reliant on exporting internationally were hit that little bit harder. We're not as reliant on international imports. What are our local sales? What's our worker productivity? This sort of thing. So you can have a look at this. You can look at your economic output. So compared to Queensland, we're much more of a domestic exporter in terms of our ag. So we're comparing that to Queensland. Our local sales comes next. And then we've got this little bit of international exporting out here as well. Our industry contribution to Queensland. So we can see in terms of exports, it's much higher than where we're looking at in terms of employment. But this is our contribution to Queensland, 2% of the agricultural exports. Our shift share analysis talks to me about how competitive and how well you guys are performing, which is very well. Now let's go up here. Now what I'm going to show you, so that's my industry sector analysis. So that just gives me that snapshot of my industry. Now I want to look at, well, how has agriculture performed over time? So when I move down here, I'm on Boulogne, my benchmark is Queensland, my industry is agriculture, my measure is employment. I can also measure over time my profitability, my output, my exports, imports, all of those changes. I'm on employment. And we can see this is how my employment in agriculture has changed over time. Here's our employment change compared to Queensland. And here's our employment change as a percentage of benchmark. We can also look at our output. We can see there's been a little bit of a decline in output compared to our employment, but it allows you guys to really analyse exactly the changes that are happening in your community. The next one is if I choose hospitals or healthcare, let's just choose healthcare and I'll use the sector level rather than the subsector. And you can actually start to see what's happening. You can actually start to see what's happening in terms of your output and total sales in healthcare. If that's not keeping pace with your population change, they're the conversations that you need to start to have at an advocacy level around, we've got this growth in ageing in our community and we need some investment in residential care services or social assistance or whatever it might be. Okay, so there's some different ways of looking at it. I think he's blinking. All right, I'm not going to be much longer. The next one we've got is our local and resident workers. So you can get key statistics for your local workforce. So we can work out how old our workforce is. It's not, it'll be that. Okay. So we've got here, this is our local workers key statistics. So we can see if I choose, for example, ag, forestry and fishing, it will talk to me about how many males we have working in the sector compared to females, how old our workforce is. It will talk to me about what sort of jobs they have, what sort of qualifications people working in the ag sector have, what are they earning, how do they travel to work, were they born overseas, do they speak a language other than English at home, all of these sorts of things. So you can keep a real eye on how that's changing over time as well. The next thing I'm going to show you, this is our COVID-19 economic forecast, and this one is updated. It's updated when we have either a new policy decision or things like that. This is where we have all of those headline figures that you saw before. So in the presentation, I talked about that GRP change. I talked about local jobs, employed residents, how we were compared to Queensland. I then talked about how we were performing now in terms of our industries. And then we've got down here our local jobs impact. And this is where I got the information around how many jobs compensated by JobKeeper. And then we can see how many employed residents jobs are impacted by JobKeeper. So this is a good one to keep an eye on as well, to see how the economy is performing. Next thing I'm going to look at is the economic impact model. Okay, and I'm going to, oops. Yeah. All right, it's I don't know why it does that. It just doesn't like the first time I put it in. Every time it just doesn't like it. But anyway, so this is the.
You let everyone know all the rest of the stuff is publicly available. Just this one we need to pass. Well, the two, the economic impact model and the event impact calculator, are the two that you need a password for, only because they take a little bit more training to use. Everything else you have seen so far is all publicly available, and if you want any of these models, just email us and I'll put my emails in the chat, and for those in the room you'll get my business card, so you'll be good.
Yep.
Okay?
That's right. So the economic impact model, and Trudy gives out these passwords, so it's not something that's hidden. It's just hidden from the public to ensure that you get the most accurate information put in, because the model is only as good as the information that you put into it. So I'm going to click on economic impact model here, and it's going to take me to the Balonne Shire economic impact model. And I'll come down here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through a quick example. And we're going to make this example it's going to be a community centre that council is building. Okay, so council is going for a grant for this community centre. The first thing that you will do is you will run the model on your building construction component of the particular community centre. That community centre will always be, you know, put in as a sales number. So how much is it going to cost? So sales mean how much is this community centre going to cost? And let's say the total value of the project is, there we go, a real one. 3.5 million. So I'll put in here community centre. That's just the construction. Yep. So we look here and we submit that information through the model. And what the model does is it takes that 3.5 million, it uses the data that we have just exclusively for Balonne Shire, and it comes up with an estimate of what that economic impact is going to be on your community, on Queensland and on Australia. Okay, so the first thing we look at is we start with our starting position. So this just talks to me about how big your building construction industry is at the moment. Then talks to me about how big all of your industries are to put together. Then we've got our direct impact on the building construction sector is 3.5 million. The industrial impact, so that's as we spend that money and we buy steel and we buy bricks and crusher dust and different things that go into the project, that creates 1.51 million. And then we have our consumption impact, which is 0.64 as people spend money through the economy during that time with the workers. So our total impact on Balonne Shire is 5.64 million. So we start with 3.5 million, we end with 5.64 million. Okay, this here, this type 1 and type 2 multiplier are numbers or multipliers that talk to me about how this money moves through the economy. These multipliers will be dependent upon what your average salary is in the construction sector. It will also be around how people spend their money in this community. Do they spend their money locally? And the reason why those multipliers are really important for each council is because in Boulogne, a construction worker is very different to a construction worker in Townsville, Longreach, Brizzy, Sydney, wherever. So everywhere I go over Australia, these multipliers change in accordance with how people spend their money. So then we look at the impact on the Queensland economy. We can see the total impact on the Queensland economy is 6.02 million, and the total impact on the Australian economy is 6.94 million. So dependent upon who your application is with, will depend on whether you put Australia or Queensland, or whether you really highlight those figures. Then we've got our jobs down the side. We've got our local jobs are 18, of which 17 will be taken up by residents. Okay, because there will be some jobs in your shire that are taken up by people from outside of this local government area, and that's determined by your journey to work numbers. Okay, so, and down here we've got total impact on the Australian economy in terms of jobs as well. Down below, guys, it gives you all of the information that you need to support your grant application. Here we've got the jobs created in Boulogne Shire. So when we have a construction project, we just don't create jobs in construction, we also create jobs in manufacturing. You can see here retail, accommodation, finance, professional scientific tech services, administrative support services. All of these different areas are where we create jobs as well. So you can see right down the bottom, all the way down, you get all this information. What you can do is you can export this into Word or PDF.
So if I'm applying funding for phase 3, that economic impact model for phase 1, which is will inform
Phase 2?
phase 2.
Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant.
I would put that in. The next thing that you need to do is not just the building construction phase, you also now need to put in, well, in this particular community centre, we're going to have 5 people working. Yeah, jobs. So we put jobs 3, is it?
Yeah, real example again.
So we put public administration. Now, the reason I put public administration because I'm saying they might be council staff, they might maybe library staff or whatever it might be. So I put public administration, community centre. I clicked that through the model, and this is my operational phase of the project. Okay, and this once again talks to me about the total impact is 0.5 million. When I come down here, the total impact on the Queensland economy is 0.56 million. And then my total impact on the Australian economy is 0.65. So that's how you quote those numbers. Then once again, you'll come to the top and you will export that information into Word or PDF, and you will take out the stuff that you don't need. You will revise what you may need. So you may say, oh, look, Trudy, we also need to know the impact on Indigenous employment and youth unemployment. Can you help us to get that information? Trudy will then contact us and say, this particular grant application is asking for these things, and we will help you get that information. Okay, so really important to know that we are at your fingertips to be able to help you. And I've helped Stephanie, I know, a number of times at the 11th hour. Yeah, at the 11th hour to get things in, because we want to make sure you guys get the best access to funding that you possibly can. And having the right information put in is really, really super important. Okay, so guys, that is the economic impact model. The last thing I want to show you is just there are reports here that you can access as well, that you can download. Okay, so not only can you just download the community information, you can also download an economic overview as well. Okay, and you can request the report via email. So you just put here industry focus, business, I want to know my economic indicators, and you can email yourself those reports. Okay, so it's this tool has so much information in it. So it's really about trying to work out what is the question I'm trying to answer first, and then trying to decipher the information around that. Yep. And then if you can't answer that question, it's then coming to Trudy and saying, we really want to showcase that we have low qualifications in these particular areas, or whatever it might be. Okay. So does anyone have any questions? We've finished super early.
Steph used to have me on speed dial, I think. Steph from Malone Council, and that's what we want. Like, we fund this. It's a very valuable model. Quite often I say when cats are around, it's bloody expensive. But honestly, we get full value out of it because we win one big grant, we get another bucket of money that comes to this region instead of not Darling Downs Southwest. It pays for itself. So, but the key is to today is to let you guys know what's in there. You can't break it. It's publicly available. Go in there, search. If you can't find it, you've now got all of our contact details. Tim and I are not the gurus, but we know it quite well, particularly Tim. So if you need to, you let us know, and we will we'll forward the question to Kat or to Glenn, or there's a whole team in ID that we know, and they will do some further investigation. And it's pretty rare that they can't find us some data. For those of you online and in the room, I just think I'll just add for you that put my video on so you can see me. And do you want to stop sharing screen then?
Yeah, mate. Yep.
Thank you. I just also let you know to always send through the questions. Really read the criteria in the grant. So a key point, there is a ton of info in there. Like, you can't even say that Kat has, scratched the surface or done the tip of an iceberg, because there's so much. You can see from the tables down the bottom on both the community profile and on the economic profile how much there is, right? But the key is be really clear on the criteria in the grant. If they want to know about jobs, give them jobs data. If they want to know about youth and Indigenous, give them youth and Indigenous data. Just give them what they want so that you tick the boxes. So be really clear on the criteria of the grants and the weightings of the criteria on the grants, and give them that information. And normally through CAT and ID, we can find that for you. Also, the other thing I would say is keep us in mind always for letters of support. So I know today's not a grant writing workshop, it's more around data for grants. But when it comes to grant writing, an easy checklist is federal member, state member, local member, RDA. There's 4 letters of support straight up that you should have, particularly if you're applying for a federal or a state grant. Even sometimes the Building Better Regions Fund, which is a federal grant, I have heard of, when it comes really close to the wire, they go to state development and ask state development, which of these projects would you prioritise? So if you stay on board, you could miss out on that grant. So make sure you've got those 4. You should always have them. So keep RDA in mind. Okay, there's very few times that we've said no, we're not going to put our name to that project. RDA, Regional Development Australia, so your local RDA. I note that we've got a few we have such a mix today. On the Zoom, we have like 2 from Maranoa, 2 from Western Downs Regional Council. We've even got a Brisbane Metro and a Sunshine Coast, and then of course we've got a whole heap of Balonne ones. Definitely, get in touch with your local RDA and see how they can help you as well for those who are outside the Darling Downs Southwest. I love that you guys are on our Zoom call, and I will certainly let my counterpart Margaret in Brisbane and Paul in Sunshine Coast know that you came in and you were part of Darling Downs Southwest, so welcome for a little bit. Just get in touch with your local RDA and find out how they can assist you with your grant applications and your grant writing. I'm just going to see if there's any more questions on the Zoom. Please send them through if you've got one. Anyone? No? Awesome. Now in the chat, if you get a chance to write it down, there's both mine and Tim's emails. They're pretty easy. It's the RDA website, and I'm director at, and he's admin at. So pretty easy ones to remember. Shoot us through an email about anything else that you think of later, or you start having a play with it and then you need some help. And as I said in the chat, usually those economic impact models, most organisations just come to us and we do them. My tip is I am out and about across a very big region a lot of the time. We have this big filing cabinet called an office in Toowoomba, but I'm rarely in it. If you want a quick answer, usually Tim's email is the best because I'm usually all over the countryside. So shoot it through to Tim and he will get something to you as soon as he can. And just another tip is, generally speaking, he works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and a half day on a Thursday. But we have been known to write a letter of support on the side of a road for an organisation. I pulled over and wrote one for an organisation who had left at the last minute. Please don't do that. And I know Tim is so giving with his time. He will occasionally, check his emails and get one out to somebody. But please don't leave it till last minute. Is my tip. If you want a better quality letter of support, and just stay in touch with your local RDA. A huge thank you to Kat, who I've got doing 11-hour days to get all around the countryside and do 7 locations in 3.5 days. As you can see, she's worth her weight in gold. So thanks everybody. If there's no further questions, I'm going to say goodbye and stop recording now. And everybody go have a great day. Have a play on there. Shoot us your questions, and I look forward to seeing great grant applications going in. See ya.